Hello, I'm Greg Rybold and I represent the Georgia Pharmacy Association's Academy of Independent Pharmacy, and I'm the healthcare attorney currently working with GPhA on pharmacy-related legislation.
And I'm Liza Chapman with Kroger Pharmacy.
We're here to talk to you about recent changes in state law regarding vaccinations that will impact Georgia patients and the pharmacists who serve them. You're probably aware, as of July 1st, 2015, pharmacists in the state of Georgia will be able to administer additional immunizations against 3 vaccine-preventable diseases without a prescription. Specifically, the new immunization law adds pneumococcal disease, shingles, and meningitis to the influenza vaccine Georgia pharmacists currently administer. The new law is the result of months of advocacy by the Georgia Pharmacy Association and its partners. It will profoundly affect the practices of pharmacists across the state. Our goal today is to help you get a handle on precisely how this new law will impact your practice and ultimately to help you get a jump on implementation and compliance. There are both legalities and practicalities involved. Through the generous support of Kroger, the Georgia Pharmacy Association is providing this video to brief you on the new immunization law's legal and logistical impact, what sort of groundwork you need to lay, and what procedures you need to follow. GPhA is grateful to Kroger for providing this platform to be able to bring Georgia pharmacists this important information. I'm going to go over immunization expansion's main legal points. Then Liza will discuss the practicalities of implementation. Let's start with the basics. The new immunization law gives pharmacists the ability to vaccinate for not only influenza, but for pneumococcal disease, shingles, and meningitis. But whether you've never administered vaccinations or you've been administering the influenza vaccine for years, you can't just start administering vaccinations under the new law. There are a number of requirements you first must meet. These include having current CPR certification, completing immunology training recognized by the CDC, and entering into a vaccine protocol agreement with a physician. The first 2 are fairly self-explanatory. The last of these, the vaccine protocol agreement, will prove the most challenging. The vaccine protocol agreement must be with a physician who is registered with the Department of Public Health's vaccination registry in the county in which you practice pharmacy or in a contiguous county. Note, there is a limited geographical exception for pharmacists employed by the same corporate entity and practicing in the same public health district. If you have a current protocol agreement with a physician to administer the influenza vaccine, you'll need a new agreement. This is true whether you plan on administering all of the vaccines or just the influenza vaccine. Whether you plan to give the newly approved vaccines or you plan to continue offering just the influenza vaccine, you must enter into a new vaccine protocol agreement this year. So, to recap, you'll need CPR certification, new CDC-approved immunology training, and a physician registered with DPH who meets the geographical requirements who is willing to enter into a vaccine protocol agreement. One point worth mentioning here is that under no circumstances do you want to offer any compensation to physicians in exchange for entering into a protocol agreement. Once those preliminaries are in place, you can begin to address the details of the vaccine protocol agreement itself. Let's look more closely at the details of that agreement. Entering into the agreement is more than just jumping through a regulatory hoop. You need to be intimately familiar with its contents. Failure to follow its provisions will run you afoul of the agreement itself, as well as Georgia law, and could subject you to liability or regulatory action. What makes this so important? Simply put, the vaccine protocol agreement tells pharmacists how they will interact with patients and administer the newly authorized vaccines. The agreement ensures that patients remain informed, that doctors are looped in, and that patient privacy is respected. The vaccine protocol agreement stipulates that there is written information you must present to the patient, including a vaccine information statement and an immunization card. The vaccine protocol agreement also stipulates that there are strict requirements regarding the patient's case history. Simply put, pharmacists must take a case history in order to identify contraindications, determine whether the patient has had a physical exam in the past year. Refrain from administering a vaccine to patients with any condition for which there is a contraindication. Make documented, reasonable efforts to obtain the name of the patient's primary care provider, and make efforts to notify the provider of the vaccine administration within 72 hours. There are also other more administrative requirements of the agreement, such as the need to retain documentation of each dose administered, enter vaccine information into the Georgia Registry of Immunization Transactions and Services, meet insurance requirements, provide an affidavit to the physician, and the posting of the vaccine protocol agreement in a conspicuous location within the pharmacy. As we've seen, the new immunization law requires some groundwork. It also requires a lot of documentation. Now let's review the requirements of vaccine administration. As you probably have surmised, the law ensures that the vaccination itself is patient-focused, privacy is protected, and risks are minimized. The new immunization law requires that you keep the vaccination procedure private by administering in a private room, area with a privacy screen, or other private area. Pharmacists must observe the recipient for at least 15 minutes after vaccine administration, and if there are ill effects, know what to do. Pharmacists must have procedures in place in case there's an adverse event or complication. To properly address the vaccine protocol agreement's privacy provisions, it's important to remain aware of your other duties to supervise technicians and the prescription area itself. If for any reason you don't feel you're able to administer immunization with sufficient privacy while balancing your other responsibilities, you should wait until there is another pharmacist on duty, or a time when you feel you can better balance your obligation to maintain patient privacy. Beyond the protocol agreement, there are also other requirements set out in the law. For example, you cannot delegate administration of the vaccine to anyone other than an intern under your direct supervision. You must maintain policies and procedures for the handling and disposal of used or contaminated equipment and supplies, and you must be aware of applicable age restrictions for vaccinating. The law contemplates significant penalties for failure to comply, which specifically includes fines as well as loss of the ability to administer vaccinations under protocol. Let me stress that this is just a summary of the new immunization law's main legal points. The new law can be found in its entirety in the Georgia Code in section 43-34-26.1. You can also find links to educational resources to help you implement the new law at GPHA's website. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Liza, who is going to discuss some of the new requirements in a bit more detail and address them on a more practical level with some real-world demonstrations of how meeting these requirements will look in practice. Liza?
As Greg mentioned, I'm going to walk us through best practices that will make sure pharmacists meet requirements to administer vaccinations under the new immunization law. Some attention needs to be paid to age requirements. The new law allows trained pharmacists in the state of Georgia to administer influenza vaccines to patients 13 and over, and meningococcal, pneumococcal, and herpes zoster vaccines to patients 18 and over. But what's allowed in regard to age under the new immunization law and what the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices recommends are two different things. It is extremely important to follow the ACIP recommendations. For example, ACIP recommends herpes zoster vaccine to patients 60 and over, and this is the age guideline you are to follow in practice. For no reason should you administer the shingles vaccine to anyone 18 years of age. It is vital and absolutely necessary to educate yourself on the indications, contraindications, and guidelines of each vaccine. ACIP is your source. You can find the ACIP recommendations at the CDC's website. Let's discuss your training and requirements in detail. To vaccinate, you must be current in CPR basic life support training for healthcare providers. Examples of excellent courses are the American Heart Association and American Red Cross trainings. These programs train you to assist a patient in the case of a medical emergency. Remember, your CPR BLS training must be in date for your immunization certificate training to be valid. Another training requirement is completing immunology training recognized by the CDC. An example of CDC-approved training would be the American Pharmacists Association's Pharmacy-Based Immunization Delivery Certificate Training Program. The APHA program is the gold standard training for pharmacists. What I'm about to say is vital. Staying up to date with the CDC-recognized training is required for any pharmacist administering vaccines, even those of you who wish to continue only administering the influenza vaccine. Remember, interns are able to vaccinate under the direct supervision of a trained pharmacist. Once you've made sure all of your training is current and in compliance, working with a physician to establish the necessary protocol agreement is crucial. Without a vaccine protocol agreement, vaccinating without a prescription is illegal. The vaccine protocol agreement requires you to sign an affidavit attesting to having the required CPR, BLS, and CDC approved trainings. The affidavit also indicates that the pharmacist has professional liability insurance. A quick word on that. For pharmacists working for a corporation, the company must provide insurance if the pharmacist doesn't have an individual policy. The affidavit must be notarized and provided to the protocol physician. The pharmacist should keep a copy of the affidavit for their records. Protocols must be renewed every 2 years or sooner based on the agreement with each physician. Greg stated earlier that a protocol physician must be registered with GRITS. Refer to the official Georgia Code for the specifics on the number of pharmacists able to enter into a protocol agreement based on practice setting. The protocol physician must be available for immediate consultation if questions arise, and the provider may designate an alternate if the authorizing physician isn't available. Do not forget that the signed vaccine protocol agreement must be submitted to the Composite Medical Board. And remember to post the protocol document in a conspicuous area. Let's talk about the vaccine administration area. The law states the space must be a private area of the pharmacy. A private counseling area is an ideal option, but be mindful you must be in direct supervision of the prescription area. If your pharmacy lacks such a space, a privacy screen will keep you in compliance with the new law. Also, the vaccine protocol agreement lists steps to follow if a patient experiences an allergic reaction to a vaccine. After administration, you must observe the patient for at least 15 minutes to determine if there are any adverse reactions. The new vaccine protocol agreement should allow for the administration of epinephrine in such cases. We have discussed the training and vaccine protocol agreement. I've given you some ideas of making the vaccination delivery area private. Now let's talk about documentation. Proper documentation is an absolute must. Prior to administering any vaccines, you must complete a case history to determine if a primary care physician has examined the patient in the past year, and if the patient has any contraindications or precautions you need to be aware of. Once you've determined if a patient qualifies for a vaccination and the vaccine has been delivered, the pharmacist must keep a record for the lifetime of the patient that includes the vaccine name, dose, lot number, expiration date, injection site, the date of the vaccine administration along with the name of the pharmacist and the address of the pharmacy. You must give the most current vaccine information statement to the patient, and you must document the date of issuance by the CDC. After the vaccination, you must provide an immunization record card documenting the following items: patient name, administering pharmacist name, pharmacy phone number, name and dosage of the vaccine, injection site, and date of administration. The pharmacist is to give the patient a document provided by the Department of Public Health explaining the importance of having and maintaining a relationship with a primary care physician. So what do you hand the patient after vaccination? The VIS, the immunization card with all the information I just mentioned, and the DPH document about the importance of having a primary care physician. Let's review. You've screened the patient and administered the vaccine. You've observed the patient for 15 minutes, and you've documented the details of the vaccination and handed the patient the printed information. What else? Contact the patient's primary care physician. As Greg mentioned, the new immunization law requires you to contact the patient's primary care physician within 72 hours. Although the contact method is not clearly defined, most pharmacists will choose to fax the documentation. Either the pharmacist or technician will need to make note of the time and date the communication occurs. The new immunization law also requires you to report the vaccination to GRITS. According to the Georgia law, all providers of vaccines in the state, whether they be pharmacists, nurses, physicians, must report a patient's immunization record to the registry. If you are not currently registered with GRITS, I recommend that you contact the GRITS help desk to set up your pharmacy. I also recommend that you reach out to your pharmacy dispensing software vendor for file download capabilities. The new immunization law requires vaccinating pharmacists to maintain policy and procedures for handling and disposal of contaminated equipment and supplies. Remember, OSHA requires the use of safety needles and syringes when administering vaccines. These devices are for the pharmacist and the patient's protection.
Liza and I have given you an outline of the requirements from both a legal and practical perspective. The Georgia Pharmacy Association will provide a number of resources to further assist pharmacists when implementing the new immunization law.
Starting July 2015, you can go to GPHA's website to find additional resources, including information on how to order the GPhA immunization expansion kit Greg is developing.
Kroger's production support has made this video possible. On behalf of GPhA, I want to thank Kroger for recognizing the importance of the new immunization law to Georgia pharmacists and patients.